We have with us astounding Sanchita, who you all have loved, adored, who have worked very hard and dedicated 1.5 months, sacrificing his time from weekends to teach us, educate us. And thank you all for participating today. Your participation means a lot to us, and Sanchita as well. So Sanchita, if you're ready, let's start today's session.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Kabir. Yeah, it was really a pleasant working with your user group, Bangladesh, as well as Women in Big Data Southeast Asia community. I think it was really good the way you guys have organized these cloud practitioner bootcamp, the kind of support you have given, and the kind of collaboration. It was really amazing. And yeah, I just want to thank all the wonderful audience for the kind of questions you guys bring up on table. The kind of post session also you reach out to me on Slack and other stuff, which really motivates me to bring a rich content every week. And sadly, this is the last session for today. But again, we have a channel in Slack. Please don't hesitate if you have any other questions, any other stuff. Do reach out to me. I'll be part of that Slack for next until we have this channel. So just not a matter for the certification. Even if you guys need any help post the certification also around AWS, don't hesitate. Reach out to me on the Slack or on the LinkedIn. With that, let me go ahead and share my screen. Today's from a session perspective, we will be covering VPC, Well Architect Framework, and Shared Responsibility. Both VPC, I'll try to cover up a bit high level. From a cloud practitioner perspective, just an awareness and idea about it would be fine. But talking about Well Architect reviews and shared responsibility model are very core. I would say that not only will be helpful from your certification perspective, but even when you start working on AWS, right, to understand what is customers' responsibility versus what AWS is responsible for. So that we will be focusing around that. And along with that, today I'll walk you through 10 sample questions of AWS. So you guys understand how exactly the exam questions look like, which I've tried to come. So I'll quickly go through the presentation so we can spare some time and go through those sample questions. So you know me, I think I don't need to describe about my introduction. I think we have been there working for last 1.5 months together. But just for the folks who have joined the session for the first time today, my name is Sanchit and I work as a lead architect at Quantify. Along with that, I am also an AWS APN Ambassador and love to contribute, be a technical speaker in different community sessions and widely renowned across AWS user groups. So that's about myself. If you have any questions, queries, as I said, you can reach out to me on User Group Bangladesh Slack channel. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, or even you can follow me on my GitHub repository. With that, let me quickly talk about the agenda. As I said at the beginning, we'll be looking forward with a virtual private cloud, that is VPC, shared responsibility model, and well architect review. So let me jump with the first section for today, which is around AWS VPC. Before we start, just some housekeeping stuff. Please, if you have any questions, queries, put it on the chat. I'll be happy to answer them. No need to wait at the end. You can just interrupt me, and that will be more fun if we can have those, this last session as more interactive one. So this architecture on my current screen, right? This how exactly your entire networking or the foundational architecture look like when we talk about the AWS, right? Now someone can ask me that, okay, oh, this is kind of complex. It is this how, what are the different components and all. The whole idea about this architecture is you guys don't have to make this architecture in cloud practitioner exam, but to understand what exactly is VPC, right? What exactly the blueprint. So if I talk about AWS, as we have learned through, and I'm pretty sure you guys would have done and have a good understanding about AWS by now. AWS provides global networking infrastructure, right? So global networking infrastructure by mean you can leverage different kinds of network facilities, the capabilities and functionality what AWS provides. But let's say if you want to isolate, create your own personal space within that global infrastructure, with the intent that whatever I can process the data, let's say I store the data or whatever the activity I do, I want to isolate and have it limited or restricted to my personal space. Then that's what that personal space you can do it with something called as AWS Virtual Private Cloud. That simply means, as a name suggests, virtually you're creating your private cloud on the global infrastructure of AWS. So whatever the processing you do, whatever the data you store, whatever the different compliances, governance you have, that limits to that VPC, to that personal space. So if you look into this architecture, right, this is an example of it, need not to be. So this example is for a two-tier application which has a web server and a database. Just for understanding, you can assume that this is like a simple online e-commerce kind of a platform, where web application is for hosting the e-commerce platform and database to store all the transactional detail. Let's assume that. Now, if I want to secure that entire platform and want to be very sure that whatever the activity that take place should be isolated from all the public and should be limited to a specific private workspace, then what I'll do, I'll put all those entire setup, all the different services, things like your EC2 instance, things like your database, things like your load balancer within a VPC. So as you can see, this dark black thick line, right, after the region is a VPC. That means any traffic, you can block any traffic or you can restrict any traffic to enter and to go. So what is called as inbound and outbound. You can block any traffic entering the space. You can block any traffic going outside from this space. That all kind of stuff you can do by deploying a private virtual cloud here. And within that, you can deploy any AWS services which you want. Now, a couple of services cannot be deployed within this stuff. They are global. They are very shared and all. Things like if you talk about S3, things like you talk about DynamoDB. Now, you cannot place those services directly here, but there are certain ways, certain things you can do by creating the private endpoint, dedicated endpoint, via which you can restrict it. Again, you don't need to worry about all those kinds of stuff in Cloud Practitioner. The only understanding what you need to have is, if you need your own dedicated space where you want to restrict all kinds of traffic, the security and kind of things which you do within that, then you can do it within AWS VPC. Now let's understand what are these different components which you can see on the screen. Public subnet, private subnet, security group, NACL, and all those kinds of stuff. Now, if I recall, most probably I think that was session 2 and session 1 also. In the session 1, we already spoke about something called as region, subnets, and those kinds of stuff. And in the second section, when we had an introduction of EC2 instance. When we deployed an EC2 instance, if you go back to that demo, you will see we provided a subnet and security group, like which exactly sub network where you want to deploy. So now let's understand in detail. You can easily connect that dot if you have gone through the second section, but in case if I assume there are new people who have joined for the first time this session, and let's quickly understand what are these all components, right? So first, starting with subnet. So if you go back here, this exactly is called as a subnet. Now let's keep that this is called as something private, this is public. Just only focus, let's say, on subnet. Subnet as simple means sub networking. This is again a short form, or you can say, of sub networking, that within this private network also, if you want to segment this virtual private cloud also into smaller segments, then that segment is called a subnet. Subnet is sub networking, that you segment the VPC also in different. Now you may ask why I want to do that. For an example, when you have different components, what I mean by components is different kinds of services such as load balancer, services such as EC2, services such as database, right? Or services like machine learning. Each service has a different characteristics, different kinds of requirement, and the people who interact with that service is different. For an example, now database, you do not need to provide public access to database. Database is always consumed by an API. Like as in practice, when you always design any application, keeping cloud aside, right? Wherever you work on database, either you directly connect that database via workbench, via some client, or you write an API on top of that database, which help you to perform any sorts of interaction. So technically, you're not exposing your database directly as a public, but your web application, you have to directly do it. For an example, you go to any Amazon website or any AWS console itself. Now we are not directly accessing any sorts of database. Database is already there, which we don't even know where it is stored and how it is stored. We always access the UI. So similarly, the traffic which is required to UI may or may not be public or private, depends on type of the application and the user. But database for sure in any given scenario has to be private, sorry. So that way, each subnet also each components require a different characteristics and type of network. That's the reason you need to segment your VPC also into different subnets to ensure that you can provide the required kind of traffic which is for them. Now, that's exactly the subnet. If you read about the subnet, a subnet, short for subnetwork, is an identifiable separate part of organization network. These are the logical division of an IP network. So as mentioned here, the same thing. Now, if I mean, what it is given in this very networking way of putting it out, but very simple understanding, as I said, you're just having a VPC and you're segmenting that VPC into subnetwork. That is called as subnet. Now, subnets technically are of two types: public subnet, private subnet. Public subnet means anything which can be directly accessible from internet. So that means any services which you deploy within that subnet can be reached via internet. They can directly interact with internet, is called as public subnet. Anything which is private, that means very specific, can be accessible within that VPC. So for a very simple example, as we were talking about in the previous slide, now you have an server, VM server, that can be public or private, but database has to be private. Now, if I talk about, let's say, any of your system, let's say you're building any e-commerce, any transaction, any platform system, online payment system. Now, the UI where you're getting the detail can be public or private, but the backend, which is processing, connecting with your bank, executing it, should always be in private to ensure that it doesn't get compromised. So those kinds of very sensitive information, either they are storing any confidential data, they're doing any kind of confidential processing, that always needs to be private. Where any kind of public facing that you want people to log into it, to access that, should be in public. So those are two kinds of types of subnet. Next, security group. In short, security group is like a firewall. Very simple example: firewall where you restrict what kind of traffic should enter, what kind of traffic should leave. So that's kind of is a firewall, and firewall works very close with the subnet part of it, right? Within the subnet, you have any sorts of security group. So there exactly you see the firewall working. Let's say, for example, when we deployed an EC2 instance, you would have seen I have created a security group and I attached that security group on EC2 instance. That means any sites of traffic which enters and exit, we can have a control via security group. Next is the network access control list, NACL, which we generally called as NACL. NACL works, NACLs, and people generally get confused between security group and NACL. NACL always works on a subnet level, whereas security group works within a subnet, the resources which is deployed within the subnet. Now, what that means is, let's say if you want to block, let's say you have 5 server which you have deployed in given a subnet. One way is, and your company, let's say standard, certain companies I've seen, they have a standard that you don't want to allow any email transaction from that server. One way of simple is you go have security group and all the 5 server. That's one of the way to do, which is also makes sense. Or the another simpler way is, if you're pretty sure that this compliance needs to be applied on all the subnets, then you can put that compliance on NACL itself and enforce on all the subnets. So even though if you don't specify it on security group, still NACL holds a higher precedency and it will be applied on all the subnets. And that becomes like one central point which can allow or block any sorts of traffic entering the particular subnet or leaving the from subnet to internet. So that's how NACL plays a very important role when it comes to controlling all the security groups, and security group plays very important role in a specific instance of the server. Now, both, I mean, someone can ask me, why do I need both, right? It's very important because, as I said, NECL becomes like a more centralized entity. It's not necessary. All the requirements of server differs. Like for example, if we see in this architecture itself, the requirement of the web server is completely different with the requirement of the MySQL. For an example, the web server always need the ports like HTTP 80, HTTPS 443, where a database MySQL will need a different port. So that if you put a NECL will block on the subnet level, which is also fine since they have been stored into a different subnet. Let's assume that both web server and RDS are stored in the same subnet, and then you apply to control the traffic via NECL. There you will not able to do a conditional base that, okay, have allow 80 if it is coming from web server or block 80 if it is coming from database, right? It's one generic consistent layer of rules that applies on subnet. That's why it is very important that first, based on the different characteristics of services, you break down into different subnet, so you can give more restriction on that. And two, you use both security group and NECL in combination to control the traffic. So that's about NECL. The next is route table. Route table is more like your index. If I simple put it out, it's like an index which you have in any book. Now in index, you have a content page where you have the topic name and you have a corresponding page number. That, let's say if you want to go to introduction to DevOps, page number 27. If you want to go to introduction to Lambda, page number 37. That kind of mapping you have. That for this particular topic, this is a page number. Similarly, in route table, that's exact the case. If whenever the traffic enters or exit, that time for which component, which reference you need to do, there exactly route table helps. And where exactly I need to send this traffic. And this route table, I mean, any person who comes from networking background, this all terms are very common even when you talk about the on-premise setup. Now in on-premise setup, generally your security group and your NECL holds the same, like it becomes a one product that can work across both. In cloud, it's a split into two entities, but route table is the exact standard thing which you have even on your on-premise side of the stuff. And this NECL and security group generally we refer as a firewall rules. So again, the public route table also behaves in the same fashion like we talk about the subnet. One, if a route table is directly connected, or if a route table has an entry for internet gateway, which is via which you can connect to the external world or any traffic, any pair, any part of the world, that is called as public. Any traffic which need not to be connected to internet and has NECL or NAT gateway in it is called as private. And default, again, default is something what is launched as a by default when you deploy VPC, which most of the people, if they are very experienced and they try to avoid using, they use public and private. So this way they can also restrict the access. So if we correlate this, it simple means any subnet is called as public if it is connected to the public route table, and that route table has an entry for internet gateway. Similarly, any subnet can be called as private if it is connected to the private subnet, a private route table, and that route table has an entry for a NAT gateway. I know this is a very critical thing, so I've tried to explain it in a very simple words. But again, please, if you have any other questions, put it on the chat. I'll repeat again. Any subnet is called as a public subnet if it is connected to public route table, and a route table is called as public if it has a entry for internet gateway, IGW, which we refer in AWS. A private subnet is called as a private when it is been part of a route table or private route table, and a route table is called as private when it has an entry for NAT gateway, not of internet gateway. So that's about VPC. Do remember it. These are very basic thing. Again, you don't need it from cloud practitioner perspective, but for sure you will be required once you start moving to the next certification or you start working hands-on as a cloud engineer. So that's about the route table. As I mentioned, internet gateway is again a managed service. So NAT gateway
internet gateway. These are all provided by AWS as a managed offering. They are responsible. Managed offering, by that simply you means they can easily scale up, scale down. You don't have to worry about patching those software, ensuring around they have a new security patch and all this taken care by AWS. You just need to configure them rightly into your route table and they will take care of the rest. Internet gateway is like your router. Any place you have a router to connect to internet. Similarly, on AWS, if you want to connect to the external world can be anything within AWS or outside AWS, like something, let's say you want to Google or download some patch from internet, download some software from internet, you need internet gateway. Similarly, if you want to interact within, let's say, now a question can be that, okay, I deployed a web server within a private subnet. Now I need to deploy a patch for that private subnet. But as you mentioned, I have deployed in private subnet. How that private subnet can connect to the internet gateway? There exactly is an option available. Since that cannot directly communicate to the external world, you can have an intermediate service of AWS called as NAT gateway, an in translator kind of service, which takes the traffic or serves the request, I mean, from private subnet and get the things from the public internet and give it back to private. But that is only limited from private to the external world. If external world try to connect to the private, that's not possible with help of NAT gateway. NAT gateway encapsulates the traffic. Again, I'm going very specific to the network term, but just do remember, if private subnet still needs to access any external, I mean, need to access the internet for downloading the patch or any other software, you can easily do it, even though they are deployed in private subnet with help of NAT gateway. And for public subnet, it is pretty simple. You have internet gateway connected, you can easily do it without NAT. So that's about the VPC. I'll quickly summarize. VPC means a private kind of space within the entire global infrastructure of AWS, where you can restrict all the traffic and you can enforce more restriction or a compliance need what you have. Subnets is like you segment the VPC into smaller chunk based on the different kinds of components or different kinds of services you have. Subnets are of two types, public and private. A subnet is called as a public when it is connected to a route table which has internet gateway entry to it. A subnet is called as a private when it is connected to a route table which has an entry for NAT gateway, not for internet gateway. Security groups are like a firewall rules on instance level within the subnet or for any services deployed within the subnet. NACL operates more on one or two subnet level. So if you need to apply any consistency or any kinds of compliance like block a port across all the subnets, then that will be part of NACL. If you want to control and have more restriction on a particular instance, EC2 or a service, then you will use security. We understood the route table. Route table is like an index where you have all the path where you need to route the table and all. Route table are of two types, public and private. Public is something which can be connected to internet gateway and private is something which is connected to the NAT gateway. So that's what we had from VPC. Again, if you have any other questions, please let me know. With that, we will move to the next section for today, which is AWS shared responsibility model. This is a very simple and very useful, I mean, very simple kind of input is there. But the thing which we need to remember is AWS always, I mean, most of the customer, when they are designing the architecture, right, they always think AWS is responsible fully to handle everything. Now, when we say fully, that means end to end. Now we talk about security, cost optimization, using new software, applying the patch on the operating system, physically maintaining the data center, physically ensuring the data and everything available, all the services are available. But I would say that's wrong. AWS is not responsible 100% to do it. Even though you use different kinds of services like infrastructure as a service, platform as a service or software as a service. You use any different types of service in any given scenario, AWS is not 100% responsible for it. Still, based on the kind of service you use, I mean, from categories, customer is equivalent responsible for it. And there exactly, we make that fundamental mistake when we design the architecture. So let's understand, given the type of services, where and which are the responsibilities of the customer around it. So if I talk about the shared responsibility, this is a very good paper AWS has published. So if you're really interested to go to the depth of it, you can go and understand and read about it. But if you want to just high levelly understand how exactly things work in this shared responsibility model, look into this architecture, look into this diagram on the right, any section which is in blue, as the name suggests, is a customer responsibility. Any section here. If you talk about infrastructure service, container services, or managed services, the blue section is customer's responsibility. Orange are responsibility of AWS. So let's start from the first one at the left hand side, which infrastructure as service, where you talk about EC2 instance. Now, when we know, I mean, most of the people by now, as in we have done at least launch a simple EC2 instance in your AWS account. If not, then I would request you go back to the video which we have recorded from session 2 and understand what exactly the EC2 instance is and other stuff. Now, when you launch an EC2 instance, you will understand in that demo what we have done. We have not provided the hardware. You need to use Intel Zen server or those kinds of stuff. We have not provided any kind of stuff. Nor we have told that, okay, you use what kind of hardware, or you use what exactly the hard disk and those kinds of stuff, which LAN cable you need to do. We have done anything about the hardware from the virtualization part, which is like what kind of security, which security group you need to provide, what OS you need to give, and all those things. There exactly, you are responsible for protecting or ensuring this all 6 things which are there. Client side data encryption, very fundamental. This is a trick, I would say. Any services today or tomorrow, you talk about AWS, you're fully responsible for ensuring or handling your data. None of these services, AWS is responsible for handling the customer data. AWS do not, as a fundamental, AWS doesn't even have an access to the customer data. So whether you talk about any APIs or machine learning services as an API or any other services, you are fully responsible for handling the customer data. Or you talk about the S3. That's a very trick, I would tell you. I mean, simple and easy trick. So client side data, I mean, customer data, as you can see in all 3 are customer responsibility. Then second thing comes up about, as I said, customer is responsible for handling the data. Similarly, customer is even responsible for data, but how you're going to handle the data? Very simple. You will do encryption. So as you can see at the last 2 bottom on blue, server side encryption, client side encryption. Let's understand what exactly, why there are 2 types of encryption. Anything which you do at your end. Let's say for an example, I'm uploading a file. Now, as I said, I mean, there are many organizations I've seen in the entire IT industry. They do not rely on AWS. They still feel AWS do have an access to customer data. So just to be sure what they do, they encrypt the data at their end itself before they upload to S3. So anything which takes place within your end is called as client side. Anything which takes place within AWS ecosystem on the cloud is called as server side. That at the server, at the client. So client side data encryption is you guys are responsible. Server side is responsible of AWS. So those 3 things becomes very simple. Customer data, when you always talk about customer data, by default, always think there is a customer data I need to protect. How I'll protect? By encryption. Then there are 2 types of encryption, server side, client side. Then comes is, as we talk about, the network traffic protection. In case of EC2 instance, we provided details like subnet, security group. So that means you are responsible for handling the network traffic. Network traffic, how are you going to handle? You're not going to play around with the Cisco cable and all those things. Network traffic in terms of the route table. Network traffic in terms of the NACL. in terms of the security group, which we understood in the previous slide. Those all falls in the customer's plate. Similarly, you selected that you need to use an Amazon Linux too. You selected which subnet, you selected which security group. So there also you're responsible for handling. And at the last, the application. By default, in the EC2 instance, you can deploy any application, right from any machine learning application to any web application like Nginx, web server like Nginx, or any kinds of other platform like Java. So you are responsible for handling that application. So that's how if you understand in very detailed, you will see that AWS, any model, AWS does the heavy lifting of it. But the things when it comes to customizing, or the things which you do within any sorts of server or with any services, there you are responsible for it. So in EC2, you can do any variety of application, you can do any sorts of data processing, you can deploy in any subnets and other stuff, you can deploy any part of networking. Those all things you are responsible for doing it. Similarly, if we take this same learning and put it into RDS, in case of RDS, you do not have access to the server. That means wherever the RDS is deployed, you don't have the permission to SSH. You don't have the permission to deploy, play around that, okay, which kind of like, outside to your entire subnet security group, you don't have the permission on which operating system it is running. Similarly, if you don't have the permission, that means AWS will take care. So if you compare from EC2 to RDS, you will see by default outside the hardware component, the platform application management and OS networking, AWS is taking care of it. You are responsible for firewall configuration. That simple means security group and all, encryption client side, network traffic, and customer data. So simply, if I put it out in 2 words, you're responsible for any sorts of customer data handling, which means encryption and other stuff, and you're responsible for the networking part of it, which anyways you're responsible because you need to deploy the RDS, which part of VPC you're deploying it, which subnet security group, you are responsible for it. So these are the 3 things you need to take care when it comes to any container as a service or platform as a service. Third thing comes as a managed service like AS3, DynamoDB, KMS. There you don't have anything like encryption. So you're only responsible for the customer data and the client side data encryption. That's exactly why most of the people, if you see, the customization decreases. If you talk about managed services, you can very less you can customize those services. Similarly, the responsibility on the customer also decreases. So it's on you how you want to balance it. There exactly we have, if I talk about myself, I've seen a kind of a pattern. If you talk about most, let's say, very new customer on the cloud or a startup kind of thing, startup company, they always look forward to go with the managed services. Managed service in terms of not just S3, KMS, DynamoDB, there are many services. Lambda you talk about, Glue you talk about. There are many services where they offer managed services from AWS. There you will see that, okay, first, you only focus on what you want to do as a business offering. 2, you don't have to worry about the shared responsibility and only focus on the customer data. So that helps any new company to purely focus and deliver the best out of the cloud. But you're very expert. You're doing any complex migration and modernization kind of stuff. There you will see that customer do have on the extreme left side, because they want to migrate their legacy application. Now those are legacy application needs customization, they need access to the operating system, they need certain kinds of tuning in the memory. There you need to use infrastructure as a service. So to address multiple different kinds of the customer, AWS provides these 3 different models, and these are the 3 different shared responsibility that comes. I hope this is very clear to you guys. And again, if you have any questions, please put it in the chat. But any given scenario, we talk any kind of customer you are, infrastructure as a service, container / platform as a service, or software / managed service, you are equivalently responsible to handle or to protect the data yourself, or whatever segment based on the type of it is, but it's not 100% responsibility of AWS to take care of it. I hope this is very simple to understand and very easy concept to explore. Okay, with that, we will move to the next one, which is very important. Most of the customer, most of the architect, when they start becoming an architect, the first thing, so here I see a question, how to understand which is a public service, which is a private service. Now, can you elaborate more what do you mean by public service and private service? I mean, I'm a bit confused, like what you are referring to public service and private service. Please elaborate that. So any architect, when they start really following their career path as an architect, the first thing they have to go through and understand is well architect framework. This is like a guide for any of the architect. S3 is a public service. EFS is a private service. Okay, first of all, let me correct it. There is nothing called as public service and private service. So it's AWS provides 200 plus service. I think is a I think you have written it. If I frame it out properly, S3 is a service which you cannot deploy within a VPC. So that's why they are not part of the private network. That's why you can use additional private link to integrate a private link or VPC interface to integrate with those kinds of services. Whereas EFS is more attached to the volume of EC2 instance, like in volume. So since EC2 can be deployed within a particular subnet, there exactly you can see. And if I understand and frame your questions correctly, how to understand which server can be deployed, which services can be deployed within VPC versus which cannot be deployed within VPC. So far, if I talk about my understanding, how you can do it, any service, you pick up any service where when you provide subnet and security group. Again, I'll repeat, any services where you provide subnet and security group, when you can configure it, that service can be deployed within VPC. Any services which you cannot provide subnet and security group when you're deploying it, that service cannot be deployed within VPC, and you have to use something like private link, public gateway, public interface, private interface, those kinds of extension to connect and bridge that private network. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, cool. So as I was talking about, any architect who, I mean, if this is very important, but any person, like you give an oath to a doctor, right? Similarly, this is kind of an oath to an architect to design a very scalable, secure, and cost optimized service. This is how I always put it out if I want to describe a well architect framework. It's very important for all the architects. I know some people may not agree with my example, but it is very important that you take an oath as an architect that whatever the solution you design for any of your customer, that meets all the principle which has been defined or put out in this framework. That's why, and again, it is, I mean, jokes apart, but it is really important that you understand this framework in detail if you want to design or want to be ensured that whatever you work on AWS, whatever you're designing on AWS is meeting the best practices, it's secured, it will work as per the expectation, and it is cost optimized. So that's why well architect framework is very heavily even promoted by AWS and very foundational. Even AWS leverage this framework for any of the services they design or any of the workload they do, and very core to of all the services. Let's understand what exactly this framework is. So first of all, well architect framework you talk about, they provide 5 pillars, which used to be before reInvent 2021. At reInvent 2021, they introduced 6th pillar, which is called as sustainability. Sustainability in terms of environmental perspective, how your application is going to work, how much kind of carbon emission and those kinds of things. Now, this pillar is live in terms of exactly, I mean, this pillar is exactly live available from AWS, but the tool which AWS offer for conducting the war, that tool is not updated, that how exactly you need to ensure that the solution which you have designed is up to the well architect review. So that's why most of the people, even though they all know that sustainability is a 6th pillar, they always still think that there are 5 pillars because the latest pillar is not yet integrated with the tool. So we'll also focus, and again, from your certification perspective, it's going to be 5 pillars. But again, for your knowledge perspective, do remember there are 6 pillars for well architect review, and that 6th pillar will be live very soon in next few months itself. So from a learning perspective, do always remember there are 6 pillars of well-architected review. And starting with that well-architected review, the first one is around security. Second is cost optimization, reliability, performance, and operational excellency. If you see in each of this pillar, I have had a couple of points, right, in this image. Like security, very simple to talk about. And you guys have learned through in all the last series, last session, 7 sessions, IAM, encryption, log monitoring. You talk about compliances, governance, anything which comes of security. It's very simple to understand. Cost optimization. In the last session also, we understood about how we can have the billing alerts, how we can have the budgets, how we can consolidate, how we can even track in terms of the saving plans and all this kinds of stuff. That falls in cost optimization. Very simple from the name of the pillar. What kind of practice you follow, or what kind of services in which manner you should configure to get more cost optimization. Reliability. Reliability in terms of how you design the architecture, which is very scalable and any person can rely on it. So in case of, let's say, simple things like it should be highly available, it should deploy in multiple AZs, it should be available in cross region if something goes wrong, it should have proper monitoring, proper health check. Those falls into reliability. Again, don't worry, we'll have a focus on each of this pillar, but I just want to give a glimpse of it, how exactly each of those pillars are. Performance. Need not to talk about a lot about this. Performance efficiency. Now, this is not only includes of using the right service to increase the performance, but how you monitor and measure the performance. So you will see about using like caching, proper right services, right storage, planning and benchmarking, and even you have a proper latency requirements and all. Now this differs. I mean, this is a very, I would say, generic guidance or principle. It need not to be necessary that you will have all the requirements. Now, if I talk about very specifically, when you use serverless services, now serverless services, you are not responsible for doing the latency. You're not responsible for scaling this out in multi-AZ. Because if we go back to a Lambda session, AWS takes care of scaling it. So now there are a couple of options from this pillar may not apply. So that's why AWS have come up with a specific lens on top of this generic framework where you talk about in detail. Again, that lens is not required from your cloud practitioner perspective, but after you get a very good understanding of the general framework, you can try to explore. And that lens is nothing. That lens is a very specific sets of questions for that given kind of workload. It's not like something new. It's cut short version or subset version of this generic framework designed for any serverless applications. So that's why I will not focus on lens for this session, but we'll focus more on the foundational part of it. So performance is that. Operational excellence, anything which you do in name of DevOps, cloud, CI/CD, cloud formation, you have a proper scripts, run book, infrastructure as a code, or game day, kiosk testing, anything falls under operational excellence. Anything which you do for DevOps testing falls into operational. So these are the 5 pillars: security, cost optimization, reliability, performance efficiency, operational excellency. Now let's understand each of this pillar in detail. Again, I would highly request everyone. This is not, I mean, there's a very good, thorough white paper available. Every person on this call, I would request you should read it, that paper before you go to your certification, as well as before you start working as an AWS cloud engineer, as a junior or as a senior. You should thoroughly follow that white paper. If required, I'll share a link on Slack or Slack channel. But it is very good that you get some time from your bandwidth and go through that paper. That paper is very exhaustive. I've tried to get more key important points from that paper, but again, this slides which I'm presenting is not the entire paper. You can think of like it's of 2% or 3% of that paper, the very key important points according to me. But I would request everyone to go through that. Now let's start from the operation excellency. Operational excellency always will talk about, if you go through this entire section in the entire paper itself, or if you look into my slide, it always talks about how well you organize your entire operational setup. When we talk about the operational setup, that means the release, the DevOps part of the continuous integration, continuous deployment. I've covered all those things into my DevOps. I think that was section. I think that was week 5th, which I have done. Please go through that and help look. Let me know if you have any questions. But there we talk about all those things in detail, like you should have continuous sorry, you need to have a continuous release cycle. You need to test. There are different services available from AWS. The whole idea of this is how you can, without any sorts of pain, in a very seamless, graceful manner, release a software from your dev environment to production with proper testing and proper satisfaction. That at the end, when that software is released in production, you have very, very bare minimum to zero amount of bug. The entire time it takes to release to production is very as less as possible. And last, when you release it, you have proper capability to roll back if something goes wrong. These are the three things you talk about when it comes to operational excellency, and all the points which you need to consider in design principles are on similar lines. Perform operations as a code. That means always, in simply I put it out, automation is the way. Don't rely on human brains. That's a fundamental thing. Human brains or human memories are good for individual. They are not good for as an organization. What I mean, minimize the dependency on humans. Anything which you feel that a specific person do have that knowledge, get it documented it. It may be possible that person is not available. He's on leave, some personal emergency. And if you want to release something, and you will have a dependency on that, you will not able to achieve. That means reduce the dependency on human beings. Makes frequent small reversible changes. As I was talking about, this is a very core. When you want to have a kind of very robust pipeline for releasing into production, always do ensure first that pipeline needs to be very frequent. Don't wait that I will do everything on the weekend. It doesn't work like that. When you talk about everything on weekend, at weekend you will think, no, I'll do it next weekend. And at the end, you see that you have a long list of things that you need to do. Similarly, and then you'll start making the mistakes. Similar is the case when you talk about the software part of it. Don't wait that I'll do everything on Friday, because Fridays people generally always are in mode of weekend. So it's nothing that there is, you have to wait for the right day. There is never a right day. The right day is that time right now. So always make more frequent, small and reversible changes. So when you make it right now, you will also ensure that right now will be small things. Because some people will say, when you say right now, I cannot deliver everything in 1 hour. That task need to be delivered on 2 weeks or 1 week. But if you start doing it one by one, let's say very simple, you want to organize an event. Let's say you want to organize an event with me again for this another stuff. So instead of giving everything in one go, you can say, okay, there are 15 things I need to do to organize an event. First, I need to get the dates from Sanchit. I need to make a poster. I need to sit down with them for the planning. I need to target the audience. I need to do this. Now, if you create a list and start at least small line items, you will see at least by week, you will achieve some proportion of it rather than doing everything on weekend. So that simple means how we as a human do. Similarly, are they saying you should also make small changes. And again, if you make mistake, that's a very small proportion, which is very easy to change. If you make a mistake, let's say in like entire software you release and you make a mistake, you need to revert entire software again. So that's a very big and expensive cycle in terms of time, in terms of people required. And again, the image which you have with external, let's say very simple, if I talk about, you're building a software or a web application. Let's think Facebook. Facebook is used by millions, billions of people across the world. Now Facebook, let's say, makes one small mistake. What kind of sentiment you will have as a user? Even sometimes when we see WhatsApp, Twitter, or Instagram, those applications are down even for 10 minutes. There's a laundry list of memes will come up in the market and all, because customer is directly affected and their sentiments are not good. So that's exactly the whole idea of DevOps, is that how you can minimize that kind of problem and that kind of issue by making small changes. So if something get affected, not the entire platform, it's a small segment or small feature within that platform. The next point is refine operational procedure frequently. That means you review your run book. As I said in the first point, document it. It's also important. You create a document and the document becomes a legacy that, okay, in last 5 weeks, no one is even using it and it becomes outdated. That's not the case. You should frequently go and review it. Anticipate failure. Be prepared. If I talk about my experience, I've been working in this entire cloud domain from last 7 years. Most of the people who have worked with me in and out, I always go, when I talk about the production release, I always go like I'm going on a war. I'm already mentally prepared something is not going to work, because I'm pretty sure that even though you do some testing, even you do everything, there are small things that may come up without any unplanned. Like very simple example can be soft limits of AWS. There is some or other thing that will come up which will fail the production, and then you have to be very sure that within that war kind of thing, how you can patiently either revert back, move back to the previous version, or you troubleshoot it, or how you can ensure that your platform is up and running. So anticipate failure mentally. It's not wrong. You always plan for the worst case scenario and learn. The more idea is keep learning. Always keep learning. There is a learning in positive as well as negative. If you have a positive cycle, still there is a learning. What went well for you? If there is any sort of failure, then that is also a learning. What didn't work out for you? So you can make it, you ensure it works next time. So that's about talk about the operational excellences. And as you see, it's not just focusing in terms of the designing the solution, it also focus how you should behave, how you should work, how exactly you can be a good developer. So that's why I'm emphasizing every person on this call, please do read this paper. Next is the security. Security is a very core. I mean, that's a word I never have to describe about. Every people do understand when I talk about security. Implement a strong identify foundation. Things like MFA, IAM roles, which we looked into the demonstration part also. So that's one. Enable traceability. So things like CloudTrail and other stuff, where you log any person who is using your AWS services. It's very important you track. How you will track? AWS provides CloudTrail. Enable CloudTrail in all the regions of your account, in all the accounts. So you understand what exactly a person has done. It can be anything. It can be as simple as that person is not available and you want to replicate the steps which he did to troubleshoot an error. CloudTrail will help you. If let's say some person has left your organization and is trying to do some malicious activity, which you should not be, that also you can track with CloudTrail. So CloudTrail is very important from a logging perspective or traceability. Apply security at all the levels. Apply security in terms of your infrastructure, in terms of the networking, in terms of the humans or services level. Apply the security on all the layers and the data and all, which we show in this, which we also learned in the shared responsibility matter. It's not just on the data. Most of the people always think about, I will encrypt the data, I will do this. Even if you open the firewall rules, how much you encrypt the data, there are many algorithms available to decrypt that in the market. So security needs to apply at everything. And again, I'll repeat this point, rephrase it in a proper. AWS is not responsible for 100% applying the security. It's a shared responsibility. So apply security at all the layers in a shared responsibility model. Automate security best practices. So automate, there are AWS services available, config and all, which you guys don't need, but do remember that there are services available to help, to assist you, to monitor, to alarm you that okay, something is wrong in your account, how to remediate it. You can do all those kinds of stuff also. So it's not just alarming, you can also leverage AWS config to remediate any action item. The example can be someone incidentally open a public access to S3 bucket. Now, we understood in the previous session that making an S3 bucket public is a very dangerous thing. Now, how we can ensure that it happens 3 a.m. in the midnight? How we can ensure that without you getting woke up, there is an automation that takes care. If it is incidentally or intentionally, anyway, there you can have config with Lambda. They have their own runbooks, Python script in it, which can just apply the same public block configuration, which we saw when in the last session itself, when we were hosting static website. This is a very simple example. Similar kind of activity you can do when someone, let's say, intentionally or accidentally open a port on 00 on internet, which we also understood we should not do that. How by default Lambda can come up or get trigger and on that event and patch those rules. Those kinds of things you can do with automation. Next, we understood in shared responsibility also. Protection of data, customer data is customer's responsibility. That can be, and it can be anything, client side and server side. Also, there are two times where data has been stored. One, data has been in transit. It is moving in communication. Communication in sense, let's say you're downloading a data. When you download a data from S3, the data which is in the network from S3 to your machine, that is called as in transit. The data which is residing only in S3, sitting there in stale mode, that is called at rest. So you encrypt both, encrypt the data which is at rest, encrypt the data which is in transit. At rest, AWS provides many other functionalities for both at rest as well as in transit. You as a customer needs to enable it. Keep people away from data. That means ensure that any kinds of data we talk about, data can be anything like logs, CloudTrail audit logs, any sorts of flow logs, actual data, metadata. Entire thing I just always say, you are revolving around data. Most of the people say that I live in technology era. I always put it out, you live in a data era. Everything is data. So do ensure that you keep people away with data, and people who should have access, give very least privilege access. Don't give any full access to anyone. It's highly likely chance that person may delete the logs or misuse the logs. So do ensure that you have a proper backup, proper policies, proper security around the data, and prepare for all security events. As we talk about, and like things like, okay, someone opens an S3 bucket incidentally at 3 a.m. Now, 3 a.m. it's very difficult for someone to get up and even first of all identify that something is wrong. So be prepared for all the security events, and that you will be prepared when you fully leverage the AWS security services with proper automation. So that's about security. And again, as I highly emphasize couple of pillars out of 6. All 6 pillars are important, but few pillars are very foundation and core, like security, performance, and even reliability. This is very core to your foundation layer. As I said, things like operational, things like cost optimization, those are very important, but again, they will not hamper you so much, which will be done if you don't follow security, reliability, and performance. If you don't do it, your customer will not be happy, your performance will not scale as you required, and from security you understand what can go wrong in that case. Reliability, as we said, your system is reliable in terms of it scales across multiple availability zone, it is available in case of disaster failure, you properly test to scale in terms of you have auto scaling. And instead of guessing that I'll need 2 server, 5 server, you prepare for the maximum by using the elasticity fundamental of cloud, things like auto scaling where you talk about and all, and have proper automation. Even though, let's say if something goes wrong, even after auto scaling and all, you have proper automation in place. The automation will help you. Let's say, very simple, you ran out of a EC2 quota. You ran out of, let's say, EC2 quota in one region. Now what you can do? Simple answer is, oh, I can go to the another region and deploy it. Or if something goes wrong, very simple. Most of the time this happens. When you auto scale after certain limit, what happens is when you do an auto scaling, you need IP addresses, private IP address. Most of the people, when they design VPC, they don't really think they are best that how they should design the IP address range. So they always get exhausted. They run out of the IP address when you scale out. Now, what you're going to do in that scene? You cannot go and start manipulating with VPC because that is your backbone. So simple of way, what I always do is either you relaunch a VPC in that same region, or you relaunch a VPC in another region and deploy that. Now, it's not that easy that you can deploy VPC and have everything set up. It can only be done when you have proper DevOps things in place, like cloud formation, automation strategy, proper run book. So in case of any sorts of event failure, you can easily have a backup plan 2, plan 3, and those kinds of stuff. So do ensure that from a reliability perspective, you have all the things, all the necessary tools, mediums in place that helps you to scale the platform, not only just relying on auto scaling and all. Performance efficiency always includes how faster you can provide the performance. Network latency you talk about, caching the responses you talk about, or you deploy the application close to your customer, which we understood in the first session also. How to select a region. Region should not be selected based on where your development team is. Region should always be selected where your customer is situated. In most of the cases, we see that most of the US companies outsource their development to India, Bangladesh, some other countries. Now, you should not select your production environment or production region as, let's say, Mumbai, because you are working or nearby to that. It should be where your customer is. Not even your customer, where is your end client of that customer. let's say even your customer is sitting in Europe, your development team is in India, or let's say in APAC, but your entire client, the end client who's going to use the software in US, I would say you should not even host in Europe. You should be hosting in US, because they are the one who will be using that application. And for them, it should not have, like, I mean, it should be very minimum network latencies. It should have proper cache, and it should be built in such a way that even as we talk about, heavily talking about automation, if you want to look out for a global vision, let's say, do you talk about US tomorrow? Let's say if they want to deploy something in Singapore, let's say third, if they want to deploy in India or Bangladesh, right? From a user customer perspective, you should have the entire platform automated, documented, so you can scale out very easily to the near region where you have the customer. So that's a performance efficiency. Next is the cost optimization. Cost optimization, very simple to say. You adopt more discounts, use things like reserve instance, use things like saving plans, stop the servers when not required, or configure the utilization of server in such a fashion, like don't use the very high end, don't use the complete low end. Try to balance the server which is required. Again, all those things, the key thing which is very important to understand, measure and monitor. You cannot apply cost optimization, as I said, right? Most of the time, I always see people are very focused on cost optimization on day one. It's a very good habit. But cost optimization, according to me, is over a period of time exercise which you do. It's not, I mean, for sure, you need to consider it certain section when you're designing the architecture, but it's more about how you continuously measure and monitor. Even though there is a scope, how well you have designed your solution, there will be some proportion of scope, some proportion, maybe 5% of it, 10%, which you can optimize it even after after you have a steady runs in production. So cost optimization is a measure and monitor game, which you should always be open to it. It should not be just only while designing the solution. So that's about what we understood, the very 5 pillars in detail, starting from operation excellency, second, talking about security, third, resilience, fourth, performance improvement, efficiency, and fifth, the cost optimization. So those were the 5 pillars which we understood of war. Now, if you want to simplify it, let's say if someone wants one kind of consolidated place where you can ensure all of this knowledge, all of this design principle, you can validate, then that also AWS is simplify by giving a tool, a kind of a tool itself in AWS console, which is called as AWS Well Architected Review. You can take any of your solution and you can run through this solution across this tool. There are roughly, I think, around 55 questions are there across all the pillars, all the 5 pillars. The 6th pillar is not part of this tool yet. It should be very soon. So across, if you take that, your solution, and run through across this 5 pillar, you will get a kind of a checklist. Like all these things you will get. You will get a proper report, a checklist, and a kind of a suggestion which you can incorporate further in your solution to design a well architected solution. So do ensure, if you're looking out for one place where you want all the best practices, all the suggestions and everything, you can look forward to this. Okay, so that's all what we have from today's session. I'll take 2 minutes of break. So if you in that break, let's cover any questions, any queries you have for the session. If you're all good, then I'll switch it back to the sample questions which we have talked about. I think we have good amount of roughly around 20 minutes plus of time. So we'll go through all the sample questions. But if you have any questions, any queries, please let me know. I'm open for that now. Any questions, any queries? Need not to be for this session. If you are still stuck in some previous sessions or the demo what we have done last session, if you have any questions or queries, please let me know. have to check the well-architected framework. Okay, so first, when it comes to the well-architected framework white paper, as I said, I'll give that framework on the Slack. I'll look out for that white paper. I'll give it on the Slack. Or let me check if it is handy at my end. Then I can bring it up, or I'll for sure take it in the Slack channel. Yep, I think this should work. Yeah, I'm putting the putting the link in the chat as well as put it on the Slack. So just in case you don't see this link, don't worry, I'll put it in the Slack too. Any other question? Okay, look, if there is one more question, if I build a solution where I can, okay, so as I mentioned, the well architect, again, there's a misleading. So the misleading is it's well architect review tool, not framework. The framework is for the white paper. The well architect review tool is the part of AWS console itself. So if you go to the console, let me give me a minute if I can log in and I can demonstrate. It is in the console of AWS itself. Once you log into AWS console, you can just search for WAR and that console search bar, and you will get the well architect thing. Just give me a second. Let me see if I can just log in and demonstrate that. But yeah, it's a part of the console itself. If you're looking around the URL, there's no another tool available. It's your AWS console where you can get from. Let me see if it is logged in. Just give me 1 second. I'll just log in. I'll show you how to access that. But there is no separate URL available for it. Okay, let me share my screen. Just 1 sec. Okay, I hope my screen is visible. So I am into my AWS console, like as we saw in the last session also, when we were doing a hands-on session. As I said, you have to just search well architect, and here you'll see under service, you see this tool. And from this tool, as I said, you have to define the details like what are you doing and other stuff. You have to give your entire architecture and all. And then you can have, otherwise, as I was talking about, you can have this, you can create your own custom lens. This is a new thing again, which AWS introduced in reInvent this year. Or you can use your own custom lens, and here you can review all the other details. But as you were talking about, there is no separate tool. You can get from this AWS console itself, the well architect review tool. Do we have any other questions, guys? Okay, awesome. So I think we are good. Let me go ahead and let me bring up my screen. I've just put it out into very simple kind of a document to understand how exactly this entire things look like when you're talking about the exam. So in the exam, again, these questions are from the sample paper which AWS provides. They are not the actual question exams. You have to prepare it, right? But in case of AWS sample question, in the exam, you will get similar kind of the format of the questions, where you will see that on a given screen, you will have some kind of a questions, and at the bottom, you will have an MCQs. Now, as I talk about in the first session also, there can be multiple kinds of MCQs. MCQs can be select one of them, select multiple of them, or it can be like a true false kind of a thing. Most of the cases, true false are not available now. It's like either one select or multiple select, like select two, select three. From given like 6-7 options, they ask you, hey, can you select 3 options? Or out of 4 questions, they say select 1 options. And for cloud practitioner, the questions are almost like 2-3 lines, and then they have a questions. The format is going to be the same. Let's go through. I have added the 10 questions here. Again, all the presentations, the lab script, and the sample documentation I have already uploaded in my GitHub repository. And again, I'll share that link also up immediately after the session. But so you will get this question in there also. No need to worry about writing it down or other stuff. Just focus how exactly you need to answer or think. Let's say this is a question which you're getting when you're in the exam. When you're live in the exam and you're getting this kind of a question. Why is AWS more economical than a traditional data center for application with varying compute workload? Now, if you go back to our first session, which we talk about the introduction to the cloud, what we understood is the biggest advantage of using cloud is the capability to launch anything, anytime, pay as you go model and all these things. Recall that answer. Let's see what are the different options. Amazon costs are billed on monthly basis. User retain full administrator access to Amazon EC2 instance. EC2 instance can be launched on demand when needed. User can privately run enough instance to handle big workloads. Okay. Now, first, if you look into the question, this is I would say the best thing about understanding the question. The question is not asking why people should be using cloud. It's asking why it is economical, why it is cost effective. Okay. User can permanently run multiple enough instance to handle. That has nothing to do with the cost effective. So you can cancel this option. Let's strike this out. Okay. That this is not the option. This is, you have to do it in your brain. Cost, EC2 costs are built on a monthly basis. If you recall the EC2 instance, it's not monthly basis, it's second level. This is an wrong information. Now, are left out with the 2 options, B and C. User retains full administrative access. Okay, so what has to do with administrative access and economical? It's not nothing to do with the cost effective. So let's cancel this option. So now you're left out with only one. EC2 instance can be launched on demand when they need it. Is this something to do with the cost effective? Yes. That means you don't have to keep your EC2 instance on 24/7. If let's say you only need for 10 minutes in one day, you can deploy it, you can delete it. So that's why it's very cost effective. So that's how you have to understand the question. What is question talking about? What is the context of the question? Take that context, apply that context across your points, and do really understand. Most of the time, you will see there are 2 options which will be very closely relative. Like ideally, this both points are right. If this would be why you should use cloud, if this question would be rather than economical, this would be like why people should use AWS rather than traditional data center. I would have selected both C and D because it's cost effective as well as it is scalable. But since the question is talking about economical, we'll only focus on the cost effective part. We'll skip the elasticity. So that's how you should talk about. That's the question 1. I hope this is very clear. And don't try to focus on the question. Focus on the way, the strategy, how I'm trying to answer this question. And it's not, you have to practice this. This all kinds of stuff you won't learn in one day, right? It's not like a magic, honestly. Listen, you won't learn in a one day. That's why it is, again, practice. There are questions available from AWS itself, practice tests available free from AWS on the skill builder itself. Try to practice more and more questions. Try to apply this strategy. Once you start mastering this strategy, you will see like on the fly, on the way, how I'm doing it. in front of you guys. Similarly, you will also start doing that thing, but it's all about practice. So that's about question 1. Let's go to the question 2. Question 2 is talking about which AWS services would simplify the migration of a database to AWS. So what talking about, which is a migration service? EC2 instance? I don't think so. AppStream? No. Storage gateway is a storage service. Then, as you can see in the name itself of the service, AWS database migration service. I'll tell you, honestly, you won't get very simple such kinds of question. If you get it, then you are very lucky enough for that day, but you won't get such kinds of simple straight question. But from the name itself, we can see in the storage. So that's why it's very important. In this entire bootcamp, we are focused on most of the questions, which will help you to have very good knowledge. But you should exactly go through, like if you go through my first session, I've covered up many services and a table around it. That table, at least you need to understand that there are 200 plus services. You don't have a knowledge of 200, but which services used on a very broad level, on a very high level, you should be knowing that. So please go and refer to that slide. So here the answer is AWS database migration service. Moving to the third question, in which AWS offering enables user to find, buy, immediately start using software solution in AWS environment. Again, you need to apply some smartness here. SDK, ops work, config. If you, as I said, you have to have that memory map of all the services. Again, I'll see if there is any sorts of memory map available. I'll put it on the Slack. But if not, then go to the table which I've shared. From the name itself, you can understand marketplace, right? This is kind of a market which is looking out to buy the software, start using it immediately. So as an option, you can see the marketplace, and you can easily identify this second and third question if you have that memory map ready in your head and which service is used for what. If you go to the next question, which AWS networking service enables a company to create a virtual network within AWS? I think that's exactly. Now everyone will say, I think 99% people on this call will say it's AWS VPC. Why? Because you guys have understand today in fundamental that what is AWS VPC. Similarly, without going in very depth, if you just have very high level understanding of the services, it will be very easy for you to eliminate from the service level perspective itself. Let's understand most of the question I can see from today's session itself, which is good. Which of the following in AWS responsibility under the shared responsibility model? Very good question. Now, here, there are 4 options. Now, what he's saying is, out of these 4 options, which fall under AWS responsibility? Configuring the third-party application, maintaining the physical hardware, securing the application access data, managing the guest operating system. I'm not going to answer this question. Can everyone put it on the chat? What do you feel? What is an answer to question 5th? This is what we cover. So that is one option. What are the rest of the people? What is your thought on this question? I see many people in the session and I have only one answer. What is an answer? Hope everyone is not copy pasting it. They have understood the question very well. Yes. So everyone is right. The answer is B. Why? If you look into all of this question, if they're talking about very generic, but physical data center, you don't even have an access to physical data center. How are you going to protect it? AWS has a responsibility for it. Any model, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, managed service, software as a service. Physical data center is the responsibility of AWS. So all of you are right. That means at least I'm teaching you guys pretty well. Okay. Can everyone please put your on a mute? Okay. Thank you. So next, which component of AWS global infrastructure does CloudFront use to ensure low latency delivery? Okay. So I see one person has responded it before even I complete the question. To Are you sure? Is B the answer, other guys? Please post your thought process. And again, I'll try to recap this. I've covered this point in when we were talking about the regions, subnet, and availability zone. In that section, in the section 1, I have covered up this stuff. Yes. So the answer is correct. Answer is B. As we understood in the basics, region. Exactly. Edge location is a CloudFront, which is a caching service. Correct. Region is a very broad concept. Availability zone is for high availability, right? For if you have multiple sub network and all those things, where availability. VPC we have talk about today. And the only option that is left is the edge location, where I think Tanveer has clearly mentioned, which is right answer and right explanation. Edge location is like a caching, which is close to your geographical proximity. So instead of routing the traffic to the original server every time and have a higher latency, you route from the cache near edge location. Next, how would a system administrator add an additional layer of login security to users' AWS management console? How you can provide one more layer of security outside username and password? Use AWS Amazon Cloud Directory, use audit IAM role, enable MFA, enable CloudTrail. One person has already answered. Any guys, any other option? Again, Amazon Cloud Directory, audit AWS IAM, enable MFA, enable CloudTrail. Do read the question pretty well as an additional layer, not as a first layer of defense. And same we covered in our session 5 about this thing. Whereas when I was going through IAM, I already talked about to focus about how exactly you can enable the second line of defense after username and password. I'll give 5 more seconds to anyone wants to answer this question. Okay, anyone else? Okay. The answer is right, enable MFA. Again, first of all, there is nothing called as Amazon Cloud Directory. 2, audit AWS IAM. There is nothing like audit. It's AWS IAM role. And again, IAM role and all those things comes up very late. First, IAM role will come up when you successfully authenticate yourself. So it's talking about this authentication. So IAM role will also not work. MFA, yeah, and CloudTrail. CloudTrail, as we understood, it's more for auditing purpose. So the only option is MFA. Again, as I said, when you first log into AWS console, the first thing comes up is username and password. Second thing, again, username and password is for most of the customer. If you have an enterprise customer, you connect with your single sign-on. But the second thing after username, password, or single sign-on is MFA, an additional layer. So always do remember what the question. Carefully read the question which they are talking about. Question 8. Which service can identify the user that made the API call when an EC2 instance is terminated? So that means which service you will use to track API call fired by an user. I already just talked about in this entire document twice about this. AWS Trusted Advisor, CloudTrail, X-Ray, and IAM. I see there is one answer already in the chat. Do anyone wants to participate here? Read the question. Whenever you fire an API call, where that call will be captured for auditing purpose. I think in this today's session itself, I have spoke about this thrice. Do anyone wants to answer this question? The options are AWS Trusted Advisor, AWS CloudTrail, X-Ray, and AWS IAM. Okay, so the right answer is CloudTrail. Trusted Advisor is more for as an advisor to help you from cost optimization and those kinds of perspective. X-Ray is more to give an insights how your application is performing. IAM, it's pretty open. It's for security layer and all. So it doesn't mean the only service which is left is CloudTrail. As we talk about that service in, I think session 5 or 4, where I talk about very clearly, don't get confused in CloudWatch and CloudTrail. If you talk about the logging, the execution of any services, it will be CloudWatch. If you want to track the audit of any API, that who fired it, who's that user or who's that service, it's CloudTrail. The right answer is CloudTrail. Which service would you use to send alerts based on CloudWatch alarm? Which service which you use to send alerts based on CloudWatch alarm? Is it SNS, CloudTrail, Trusted Advisor, or Amazon Route 53? Do anyone wants to answer this? Which service? Just remember that. Which service which you use to send the alarms? AWS SNS, CloudTrail, Trusted Advisor, Route 53. I'll take a pause. Okay. Do anyone wants to answer it? Correct. So the right answer is SNS. From the question itself, you see send alerts. Alerts means notification. And we understood that in session 3, the only service which session 3 or 4, the only service which is used to send the alerts or notification is SNS. So it's SNS. CloudTrail we understood in the previous question, Trusted Advisor also, and Route 53 is for the domain service. So it's SNS. The last question, where can a user find the information about prohibited action on AWS infrastructure? So the questions are where a user can find what a user can do versus what user is allowed to do on AWS versus not. The options are Trusted Advisor, IAM, Billing Console, AWS Acceptable Use Policy. If you apply your knowledge and what you have learned from these 10 questions, you should be able to put this out. I'm pretty sure most of the people will answer it wrong. I'm again recapping it. This is the question, very important question, where user can find the information prohibited action on AWS infrastructure. In this itself, in this entire document, I have given you the approach of canceling, reject the options and answer. We have understood about Trusted Advisor. We understood about IAM, Billing Console, and Acceptable Policy. Put your thought process, which exactly is the case. I'll take a pause of few more seconds and then I'll give an answer to it. Okay, so the answer is AWS Acceptable Policy. Exactly. You never heard about it. It's AWS Acceptable Policies. It's not that very important. But again, if you want to understand what as an user you can do versus not, then it's AWS Acceptable Policies. There exactly. I think this is the reason I've put out this question. Very important is, I think someone in the chat mentioned, I haven't heard about this thing. You will see many questions where it may be very new for you. There you see the option. First, understand the question. See the options. Have you heard about Trusted Advisor? Yes. Have you heard about IAM? Yes. Have you heard about Billing Console? Yes. Recall what is their functionalities, why they are used for, what they are used for, what is their intent. Are they used for telling user you are not allowed to do this? They are not talking about the access management. I think most of the people got confused between B and D. It's not talking about the access, which user has a permission to do. It's not using anything permission. It's saying what is how action which you can do on AWS infrastructure, not access management. So if you just strike all the three options, the only option which will left is the AWS Acceptable Policies. So intentionally I've added this question so you understand that there are certain scenarios, certain time you may not how well you prepare, how much you practice. There will be few questions which will be very new for you. First, don't spend more time on that question. It's a game of time. Put that question into review mode. There is a review option available. Put that question into review mode. Come back later and answer it. And at the last, when you're on the review screen, do ensure, put your bets on that question. Don't leave it empty because there is no negative marking. So even though worst case scenario, most of the people took a bet on answering AWS Acceptable Policy, few people took a bet to answer IAM. Again, first of all, even if you're wrong, you don't answer, then also you're going to get 0. If you're wrong, then also you're going to get 0. So don't leave any question unanswered. Whatever it is, whatever you feel is the right, go and answer for it. Even though if you don't answer it, it's going to be 0 only. There is no negative marking. So that's why I do always first apply the strategy. Whatever the options you know, try to connect to them. And then the left out option can be one of the answer. And don't spend more time in one of the question. Try to attend all the questions and mark the question which you're not sure as review. Last, at the review screen, don't leave out any question without answering. Because anyways, if you don't answer, you're going to get 0. For negative answer also, you are going to get 0. There is no negative marking. So those were the 10 sessions, the 10 questions which we have. Again, this is a sample question. So you guys get into that mode, how the question comes. And again, I've given the explanation also why the right questions or the answers are. This document is again the part of the GitHub repository where we have the other presentation. So that's all I have from today's session, where we understood in detail the working of VPC, shared responsibility model, and well architect framework. As I said, I've given the link of the well architect framework white paper is very important. Please everyone go and read it. Not from certification perspective, even for very general knowledge and awareness of AWS. I've given the link of this white paper in the Slack channel. Go and review that. The presentations and everything I've uploaded in the GitHub along with lab. I'll post the GitHub link after this session. And that's what I have from today's session, our last session. If you have any other questions and queries, please put it in the chat. I'll be happy to answer them. Okay, after giving the answers, can I change the answers in the exam? Yes, you can do that if you have put it into the review. So yes, you can change the answers in the exam if once you review it. I mean, if you, let's say for example, I exactly don't remember of the cloud practitioner. I think there are 65 questions are there or 70. If you mark that questions, let's say after 70, there are 10 questions which you're not sure. If you put it as under review when you're saying, then you can still go and edit the answer and you can correct it. Let's say after B and C, you understand, no, it should be C and D. You can make those changes. That's all possible if you mark as review. Please, if you have any other questions outside the session about the exam, about any AWS stuff, please put it on the chat. I'll be happy to answer them.
Sanchit, I have one question.
Yes, please.
That is, since this is the last session, so people who are going for the cloud practitioners exam, so what other materials or resources that they can follow, or where can they find them? Or let's say they want to practice more of the practice questions. Where can they find them, or what other resources that they can follow? If you can give us some insights on that, or a definitive guide that people can follow, that would be very good for everyone.
Sure. I think that's a very good question, Kabir. Yes. So what I was planning, right? I was planning to create a document and share it on the Slack itself, post the session. But since you've already brought up that question, is first, I would say go through all the 7 sessions. Majorly, I think you can skip 6th one because that's not required. But I would say go through all remaining 6, right? Understand each and every point, all the presentations, the GitHub which I've given. That's you should do it at first step. 2, the well architect reviews and the memory map, well architect reviews, billing, and the memory map of all the services, all the 200 plus services. That is the second thing what you should have very clear. There should not be any doubt about it. And 3, when it comes to practicing more questions, AWS has this free exam, practice exam. They have just from this year itself, they have providing 20 questions as free to practice in a proper exam mode kind of thing. I will share the link of that particular stuff. It is available from Skill Builder itself. You can log in into that, create your account, and you can just enroll and give more practice to that. It's a free multiple attempts you can give. So go through that. And again, outside that also, if someone really wants that, okay, no, I am ready to buy any course and do it, there are few courses available on Udemy itself for practice tests purely. You can look out, there might be like couple of 100 to 300 questions. you can go through that also. But I would say just don't go to the practice test now. First, as I said, focus, go through all the presentations and sessions to create the memory map, billing, the memory map of all the services, the billing thing which I talk about, and the well architected. And 3, the AWS practice questions. And 4th, if you still feel that I need to more practice, then go for any of the paid course from Udemy. If you follow this 5 things, that is more than suffice for cloud practitioner.
Thank you so much, Sanchit. I think we have another question.
So again, Tanvir, I would suggest there are many instructors available in the market, right? I won't prefer this is the best, that is the best. It's individual way, individual pace, and they are prerequisites, right? I mean, someone will also have preference for other courses, because if they are already working on cloud, for them it will be easy. But if you have, you love them, I know, I've also, I know Enreal, so I know about that, it's very good. But if you feel for other people it's not necessary that you should go for this course only, as I said, this 4 or 5 things, 4 things, you can easily do it without purchasing any course. But as Tanvir also mentioned, if you really want to practice more and more and want to be 100% sure or above that, you want to clear, then you can purchase any of the courses. There are many courses available on Udemy platform from multiple instructors.
Thank you so much, Sanchita. Thank you so much for dedicating such a huge amount of time and sharing some of your knowledge with us. You are an intellect and a very kind and giving person who has been working very hard day and night for the community and making time beside having a full-time job and your busy schedule. We are very grateful to you that you gave us these lessons and made us so easy to go for the certifications. We'd love to have more sessions with you in the future. And I think we all will be very much in debt to you for all the efforts that you have put throughout this 1.5 months. So with that, we are ending the AWS Cloud Practitioner Certification Bootcamp. Thank you everyone for making it a successful one. You can stay connected on our Slack channel and on our social media groups and pages for future sessions. You can also connect to Sanchita and all of us on LinkedIn and also the Slack channel. Sanchita will be available on the Slack channel if you need any kind of help or if you have any queries. So with that, we're ending the bootcamp. Sanchita, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think you covered up most of my part, Kabir. Thank you to the organizers for both AWS Bangladesh User Group as well as Women in Big Data Southeast Asia. Special thanks to you, Kabir, as well as to all the participants, Tanvir, Fira, Abdullah, all. I know you guys I've seen. This is my bad habit, but I keep checking the status or the chat section. I see you guys are very proactive, very interactive throughout all the 7 sessions, as well as on the Slack. Please follow the same trend. It's very important that you get best out of every session, whoever the speaker is. So keep doing that. It's a very good habit. And at the last, please feel free to tag me once you clear a certification. Please feel free to tag me, or if you need more help outside this bootcamp also to prepare for your certification, don't hesitate. Drop me a message on Slack. I'm part of that Slack channel and will be part of it, associated with the AWS Bangladesh user group. Please do reach out to me and let me know if you have any questions and queries there. And it was really good working with all of you guys. And I hope to connect with you guys and do multiple such boot camps in near future. Thank you for giving this opportunity to me. And yeah, stay hungry, stay foolish. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanchita. So there we end today's session and this bootcamp. Thank you. Have a good weekend and have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.